James stood at the restaurant's entrance, adjusting his cufflinks. "Do I look okay?" he asked with a playful grin. Alicia smiled, smoothing the lapel of his blazer. "You look perfect. Stop worrying." She tugged at her silk dress, trying to feel as confident as she had at home. The delicate fabric clung to her in just the right places, but something about stepping into this upscale restaurant made her uneasy. The heavy glass doors swung open, and they were greeted by Denise, the hostess. She was thin, with sharp cheekbones, her lips pursed into a tight, professional smile. "Good evening. Do you have a reservation?" Denise asked, looking past Alicia, as if she hadn't seen them at all. "Yes," James said warmly. "Reservation for two, under James Mathis." Denise's fingers hovered over the iPad. Her eyes finally landed on Alicia, and the glint of recognition was unmistakable, though she masked it quickly. Alicia's stomach twisted. "Ah," Denise murmured. "Right? Table for two. Follow me." Her tone was neutral, but something cold lingered beneath it. She turned without another word, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor as she led them deeper into the restaurant. James glanced at Alicia, his brow slightly furrowed. "Everything okay?" he whispered. "Yeah," Alicia lied, forcing a smile. "Let's just enjoy the night, okay?" They walked past rows of neatly arranged tables, most filled with well-dressed patrons sipping wine. Denise kept leading them further, through the bustling dining room, past the main floor with the perfect city view, until they reached a dark corner near the back. "Here we are," Denise said flatly, gesturing toward a table crammed awkwardly between a wall and a storage door. "Enjoy your evening." Alicia blinked. "This can't be our table," she muttered, glancing around. It was far from the elegance of the main dining room. The table looked cramped and forgotten, as if no one had used it in weeks. James offered a polite smile, trying to stay calm. Excuse me, could we possibly sit somewhere closer to the front?" Denise's smile was thin and condescending. "Sorry, this is the only available table right now. We're very busy tonight." James hesitated but decided to let it go. "Fine," he said, pulling out Alicia's chair. Alicia sat down stiffly, her discomfort growing. "This feels wrong," she whispered as James sat across from her. "It's just a table," James said, though his jaw tightened. He drummed his fingers against the edge of the table, but then forced a smile. "We're here to celebrate. Let's not let this ruin it, okay?" Before Alicia could respond, Rachel, the waitress, appeared. She wore a crisp white shirt and an air of disdain that was impossible to ignore. Her pen dangled loosely between her fingers as if taking their order was beneath her. "Good evening," she said, with a tone that suggested she didn't mean it. "Can I get you started with something to drink? Perhaps a house beer?" James smiled politely. "Actually, we'd love to start with champagne. It's a special night." Rachel's eyebrows lifted ever so slightly. "Champagne?" she repeated, the word dripping with disbelief. "Yes," James replied firmly. "Champagne." Rachel scribbled lazily on her notepad, muttering under her breath just loud enough for them to hear. "Champagne, sure." Alicia glanced at James, her cheeks burning with shame. "I think we should go," she whispered. "We're not going anywhere," James said, though his voice was tight. "We belong here just as much as anyone else." Rachel returned with the champagne, but instead of serving it properly, she plunked the glasses down carelessly, sloshing some of the liquid onto the table. "Oops," she said with a fake smile, offering no apology. James kept his composure, though his hand gripped his glass a little too tightly. Alicia stared at the puddle of champagne pooling between the bread plates, her appetite fading. "Are you ready to order?" Rachel asked, tapping her pen impatiently. Alicia hesitated, glancing at the menu. I'll have a salmon, please." Rachel snorted, as if Alicia had told a joke. "Sure. You sure you don't want something more familiar? Maybe the chicken?" James's eyes darkened. "She said salmon," he said quietly, his voice hardening. Rachel gave a little shrug. "All right, salmon it is. And for you?" She turned to James. "The steak, right? Or is that a little too pricey for you?" Alicia's hand tightened around her napkin, her knuckles white. James inhaled deeply through his nose, trying to maintain his calm. The filet mignon, he said slowly, medium rare. Rachel scribbled it down with exaggerated boredom. Okay, but just so you know, it comes with truffle butter. That might be an acquired taste. Alicia's face burned with humiliation. James gave Rachel a hard stare, but she only smiled, satisfied that she'd made her point. We'll make it work, James said, keeping his tone steady. Rachel snapped her notebook shut. Great, I'll get that in for you. With that, she turned on her heel and walked away without another word. The silence between James and Alicia was heavy. Alicia rubbed her temple, overwhelmed by the weight of the evening. I'm sorry, she whispered. This whole night feels like a mistake. James reached across the table and took her hand. No, it's not. You and me. This night is about us. Don't let them win. Alicia nodded, though her heart wasn't in it. She glanced toward the front of the restaurant, where Denise stood by the hostess desk, her arms crossed, eyes lingering on their table. Alicia felt like a bug under a magnifying glass. She knows, Alicia whispered. Knows what? James asked, confused. Alicia shook her head quickly. Nothing. Forget it. James studied her for a moment, but before he could press further, Rachel returned, this time with their food. She slammed the plates onto the table, rattling the silverware. There you go. Enjoy, Rachel said with a grin that was anything but friendly. She lingered just long enough to make them uncomfortable before walking away. Alicia's appetite was gone. She pushed the food around on her plate, stealing glances at Denise, whose smug expression told Alicia everything she needed to know. This wasn't just about race. This was personal. James sighed heavily, his frustration palpable. We can leave if you want, he offered softly. Alicia shook her head. No, I can't let her win. James gave her a small smile, pride flickering in his eyes. That's my girl. But as Alicia forced a forkful of salmon into her mouth, she couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. James watched Rachel disappear into the kitchen, gripping his fork like it was a lifeline. He hated how powerless he felt. He'd endured plenty of microaggressions before, at work, in stores, even at airports. But something about this night hit harder. Here, where they'd come to celebrate love and joy, they were treated like intruders. Are you okay? James asked gently, watching Alicia push food around her plate without eating. Alicia sighed. I told you we should have gone somewhere else. No, James said firmly. We belong here. I'm not letting them ruin this. Before Alicia could respond, Denise reappeared at the hostess desk. She locked eyes with Alicia, a small, satisfied smirk curling the corners of her lips. Alicia felt that familiar knot in her stomach, the knot she'd carried since leaving her old job. Denise knew exactly what she was doing. I need to tell you something, Alicia whispered, her voice low and uncertain. James leaned in, sensing the weight behind her words. What is it? Before Alicia could speak, Rachel reappeared at their table, interrupting the moment. So, she began with a sly smile. Is everything to your liking? Her voice was sweet, but the malice was unmistakable. Alicia clenched her jaw, her cheeks flushing. It's fine, she said through gritted teeth, desperate to end the conversation. Rachel's eyes gleamed, as if sensing her discomfort. You're sure? I can bring something more suitable if the menu is too sophisticated. James dropped his fork, the clatter of metal against porcelain startling Alicia. He looked Rachel dead in the eye. We said it's fine. Just bring the check when you're ready. Rachel gave a mock sympathetic pout. Of course. I'll be right back. She strutted off, swaying her hips with exaggerated arrogance. Alicia exhaled shakily, her hands trembling in her lap. I hate this, she muttered. I know, James whispered, reaching for her hand. Just a little longer. We'll get through this. But Alicia could feel the walls closing in around her. Denise's presence was suffocating, like a shadow that refused to leave. Memories of their time working together resurfaced. The awkward exchanges, the jealousy that festered beneath polite smiles. Denise had always wanted more, and when Alicia had been promoted, Denise's career had collapsed. Alicia had tried to tell herself it wasn't her fault, but now, sitting at this table, it felt impossible to ignore. This isn't a coincidence, Alicia said suddenly, her her voice low. James frowned. What do you mean? Denise, the hostess. Alicia glanced toward the front of the restaurant, where Denise stood, arms crossed, watching them like a hawk. I used to work with her. She hates me. James blinked, confused. Wait, what? You know her? Alicia nodded, guilt washing over her. Yeah, from my old job. I got a promotion she wanted. She blamed me when things went bad for her. James ran a hand over his face, struggling to process what he'd just heard. So, you think this whole thing, the table, the way they're treating us, is because of that? Yes, Alicia whispered. It's not just racism. It's personal. James sat back in his chair, stunned. He glanced toward Denise, who stood with a smug expression that made everything click into place. This wasn't just a bad night, it was revenge. Why didn't you tell me? James asked, his voice tight with frustration. I didn't think it mattered, Alicia admitted. I never thought I'd see her again. James shook his head, biting back the anger rising in his chest. It does matter, Alicia. If I had known, he trailed off, exhaling slowly. We wouldn't be here. Alicia lowered her gaze, guilt pressing down on her like a weight. I didn't want to ruin our night. James opened his mouth to respond, but before he could say anything, Charles Matthews, the restaurant owner, strode into the dining room. His expensive suit and polished demeanor made him stand out, and the room grew quiet as patrons noticed his arrival. Charles made his way toward James and Alicia's table with purpose, the air thick with anticipation. Alicia shifted uncomfortably in her seat. What now? Good evening, Charles said with a practiced smile, extending a hand toward James. I'm Charles Matthews, the owner. I heard there was an issue with the service tonight. James glanced at Alicia, then back at Charles. Yeah, you could say that. Charles nodded, his expression carefully neutral. I apologize if any of my staff made you feel unwelcome. That's not how we run things here. Before James could respond, Denise approached, her smile tight and fake. There's no problem, Mr. Matthews. I already took care of everything. Alicia felt her stomach drop. Denise's attempt to smooth things over only confirmed what she already knew. Denise was trying to protect herself. James, however, wasn't having it. Actually, there is a problem, he said, his voice calm but firm. We were treated like we didn't belong here. And that started the moment we walked through the door. Charles glanced between Denise and James, his expression unreadable. I see, he said quietly. Rachel reappeared with the check, but before she could place it on the table, Charles held up a hand. Rachel, you're dismissed. Rachel blinked, stunned. Excuse me? You're dismissed, Charles repeated, his tone leaving no room for argument. Clock out and leave. Now. Rachel's face twisted with disbelief. You can't be serious. I'm very serious, Charles said evenly. We don't tolerate that kind of behavior here. Rachel stared at him for a long moment, as if waiting for him to change his mind. When he didn't, she scoffed and stormed off, muttering curses under her breath. A murmur spread through the restaurant as diners whispered about what they'd just witnessed. Alicia felt a strange mix of relief and unease settle over her. Rachel was gone, but Denise was still there. Charles turned back to James and Alicia, offering a polite smile. I'll have the rest of your meal comped, of course. And if there's anything else you need, please let me know. James nodded slowly, though his eyes lingered on Denise. He could feel the tension radiating from her, as if the night wasn't over yet. Thank you, James said, his voice measured. Charles nodded and walked away, leaving James and Alicia alone at their table. For a moment, neither of them spoke. I told you, Alicia whispered, her voice trembling. It's not over. James squeezed her hand under the table. We'll get through this. Together. Alicia forced a smile, but deep down, she knew the night was far from over. Denise wasn't done with them yet. The clatter of dishes and quiet chatter filled the room. But for James and Alicia, the restaurant felt like a pressure cooker about to explode. Alicia's heart pounded. Charles might have handled Rachel, but Denise was still watching, waiting. You good? James asked, though his expression showed he knew the answer. No, Alicia muttered, shaking her head. She's not done. I know it. James sat back, drumming his fingers lightly on the edge of the table. He followed Alicia's gaze toward Denise, who was back at the hostess stand, whispering to a busboy and casting glances in their direction. "She wants me to feel this," Alicia whispered. "She's been waiting for this moment." James clenched his jaw. "Why didn't you tell me about her sooner? I could have helped." "I didn't think she'd ever cross my path again," Alicia admitted, rubbing her temple. "And I didn't want to drag you into it. I thought I'd left it all behind." "Yeah, well," James muttered bitterly, "it's pretty clear she hasn't." As the tension sat heavy between them, Denise made her move. She approached the table, her smile razor-sharp, fake as ever. "Enjoying the meal?" Denise asked, her voice dripping with insincerity. James gave a tight-lipped smile. "Is there something you need?" Denise ignored him, her focus locked on Alicia. "It's been a long time, hasn't it, Alicia?" Alicia's stomach flipped. She'd known this confrontation was coming, but hearing her name spoken in that voice, with that venom, made her feel exposed. James shifted in his seat, glancing between the two women. "What's this about?" he asked, his patience wearing thin. Alicia exhaled slowly, her voice low. "Denise and I used to work together." Denise's laugh was bitter, cutting. "That's a polite way of putting it." James leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "What do you want, Denise?" Denise folded her arms, clearly savoring the moment. "Just enjoying the view," she said, her smile laced with cruelty. "It's funny, isn't it, how the tables turn? You probably thought you'd never see me again." "Huh, Alicia." Alicia started, but Denise held up a hand. "Save it," Denise snapped. "You got your promotion, didn't you? Got everything you wanted. Meanwhile, I lost my job, lost my apartment, had to start from scratch." "That wasn't my fault," Alicia whispered, though the guilt in her voice was unmistakable. "No." Denise leaned in slightly. "You knew I was next in line for that project. But you smiled through it all, took the credit and never looked back." James shook his head, confused and angry. "Hold on. You think Alicia did that to you on purpose?" Denise's eyes flashed. "I don't think." "I know." Alicia's throat tightened. "I didn't know, Denise. I swear." "Yeah," Denise said coldly. "Well, it didn't stop you from taking everything." James placed a hand on Alicia's arm, sensing how close she was to unraveling. "This isn't the time for this," he said, his voice low but steady. Denise smirked. "No, this is exactly the time. See, I wanted you to feel it, Alicia, what it's like to have everything taken away in front of people who think you don't belong. Feels awful, doesn't it?" Alicia's eyes burned, and she blinked quickly, fighting tears. "I never wanted to hurt you, Denise. I swear." Denise's smile wavered for a moment, as if Alicia's words had hit somewhere deep. But it didn't last. She folded her arms, deflecting. "Apologies don't fix things. They just make the person saying them feel better." James had had enough. "Okay, you've had your moment. What do you want from us?" Denise gave a small shrug. "I just wanted her to know what it feels like." "You got what you wanted," James said. "Now leave us alone." For a moment, Denise seemed to waver. Something shifted in her expression, regret, maybe, or exhaustion. But she quickly buried it under the mask of anger she'd worn all night. "You two enjoy the rest of your meal," Denise said with a mocking smile before walking away. Alicia exhaled shakily, her whole body trembling. "I should have seen this coming," she whispered. James shook his head. "No, Alicia, this isn't on you. She made a choice tonight, just like you made one back then." Alicia looked up at him, guilt still heavy in her eyes. "But it wasn't just a choice, James. I was trying so hard to succeed. I didn't see who I hurt along the way." James gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. "You're not responsible for how someone else deals with disappointment. She had options, Alicia. This was her choice." Alicia nodded slowly, but it was clear she still felt the weight of the past pressing down on her. As they sat in silence, trying to absorb everything that had just happened, Charles Matthews returned to the table. His polished smile was back, as if nothing unusual had happened. "Is everything all right now?" Charles asked smoothly, his gaze flickering toward where Denise stood at the hostess stand, her back turned to them. James gave a slow nod. "We're fine." Charles smiled warmly. I hope tonight hasn't been too unpleasant. I'd like to offer you both a complimentary meal the next time you visit. Alicia forced a polite smile. Thank you. But as Charles walked away, she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't coming back. James leaned closer, his voice low. You ready to leave? Alicia nodded. Yeah, let's get out of here. They stood, gathering their things. As they walked toward the exit, Alicia glanced back one last time at Denise. She wasn't smiling anymore. For a moment, Alicia considered saying something, offering another apology, or trying to make peace. But she knew it wouldn't change anything. Some wounds ran too deep to heal in one night. James held the door open for her, and as they stepped out into the cool night air, Alicia took a deep breath, feeling lighter. The worst was over, for now. We'll be okay, James said, wrapping an arm around her shoulder. Alicia leaned into him, nodding slowly. Yeah, she whispered. We will. But as they walked down the street, hand in hand, Alicia knew that some ghost from the past had a way of lingering, no matter how far you tried to run. The walk to the car was quiet. Alicia leaned into James's side, her heels clicking softly against the pavement. The cool night air should have felt refreshing, but Alicia's mind was still buzzing with everything Denise had said. Each word echoed in her head, filling her with guilt and regret. Hey, James whispered, giving her shoulder a squeeze. You with me? Alicia nodded, though her heart wasn't in it. Yeah, I'm here. James unlocked the car, and they both slid into their seats. The soft glow of the dashboard lights cast shadows over their faces as Alicia stared through the windshield, lost in thought. What are you thinking? James asked gently, turning toward her. Alicia began, but then fell silent, chewing her bottom lip. She was right about some things, you know. I didn't mean to hurt her. But I did. James sighed, gripping the steering wheel. You didn't know, Alicia. It's not fair for her to dump all of that on you tonight. Alicia turned to him, her voice cracking. But what if I had known? What if I should have noticed? I was so focused on getting ahead, on proving myself, that I ignored everything else. And she paid the price for it. James shook his head. You can't live your life like that, babe. You did what you had to do. And Denise, she made her own choices. Alicia closed her eyes, letting James's words settle over her. But the guilt gnawed at her, relentless. It didn't feel that simple. They drove in silence for a few minutes, the hum of the city passing by their windows. James tapped his fingers on the steering wheel, glancing at Alicia from time to time. He could see how much the night weighed on her, and it frustrated him. Do you regret it? James asked suddenly, breaking the silence. Regret what? Alicia replied, her voice soft. Getting the promotion, taking the project that she wanted. Alicia stared out the window, her reflection flickering against the glass. I don't know. I don't think I ever really thought about it until now. James tightened his grip on the wheel. You shouldn't regret it. You earned that promotion. Don't let her make you feel like you stole something. Alicia exhaled slowly. It just feels complicated. James glanced at her. I get that, but you can't carry other people's failures on your back forever. Alicia, when they pulled into their driveway, Alicia stayed in her seat for a moment, staring at the darkened house. James reached over, resting a hand on her knee. We're home, he said gently. Alicia gave him a small, tired smile. Yeah, home. They stepped out of the car, and James circled around to join her. He took her hand as they walked toward the front door, their steps slow and deliberate. The weight of the night still hung between them, but there was comfort in the small things. The way his fingers curled protectively around hers, the way the quiet hum of their neighborhood wrapped around them like a blanket. Inside the house, James kicked off his shoes and stretched his arms. Alicia set her clutch on the kitchen counter and leaned against it, running her hands through her hair. You want some tea? James asked, already heading toward the stove. Alicia shook her head. No, I just want to sit for a second. They collapsed onto the couch, the cushions sinking beneath them. Alicia curled into James's side, resting her head on his chest. His heartbeat was steady, and for the first time that night, she felt herself start to relax. But the quiet didn't last long. A sudden ping from Alicia's phone broke the silence. She reached for it reluctantly, dreading what she might see. It was a notification from Twitter. A post about the incident at the restaurant had gone viral. Alicia stared at the screen, her stomach tightening. The post detailed the public firing of Rachel, painting Charles Matthews as a hero for standing up to racism. Hundreds of comments flooded in, praising the restaurant and criticizing Rachel's behavior. James peered over her shoulder. Wow, that didn't take long. Alicia scrolled through the comments, her unease growing with every word. The narrative was completely focused on Charles, as if the humiliation they'd endured was just a backdrop for his redemption arc. They're making him out to be the good guy, Alicia whispered bitterly. James snorted. Of course they are. People love a hero story. Alicia set the phone down with a sigh. It's like we don't even matter. We were just props in his little performance. James wrapped an arm around her shoulder. It's not about them, Alicia. It's about us. We know what really happened tonight. Alicia nodded, but the weight in her chest remained. The truth was more complicated than any tweet could capture. The next morning, Alicia woke up to find her phone buzzing nonstop. The post about the restaurant was everywhere. News outlets had picked it up, and people were dissecting every detail. But there was no mention of Denise or the personal vendetta that had fueled the night's events. Alicia's hands trembled as she scrolled through the news. It was as if Denise didn't exist. The focus was entirely on Rachel's firing and Charles's quick action to restore order. James entered the room, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. "Anything new?" he asked, setting one down in front of her. "Just more praise for Charles," Alicia muttered. "It's like the whole point got lost." James sipped his coffee thoughtfully. "That's how it usually goes. People latch onto whatever story makes them feel good." Alicia set her phone aside, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. Denise had hurt her, humiliated her, and now it was like it never even happened. "I should reach out to her," Alicia said suddenly. James raised an eyebrow. "To Denise? Why?" "I don't know," Alicia admitted. Maybe I need to say sorry. For real this time. Not just for what happened tonight. For everything." James leaned back, studying her. "You think that'll change anything?" Alicia shrugged. "Maybe not, but I think I need to do it. For me." Later that day, Alicia sat at the kitchen table, her phone in hand, debating whether to send the message. It felt strange to apologize to someone who had gone out of her way to hurt her. But deep down, Alicia knew this was about more than just tonight. With a deep breath, she typed out a simple message. "Denise, I'm sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. I know I can't change what happened, but I hope you can find peace." She hit send before she could second-guess herself. James leaned against the doorway, watching her. "Feel better?" Alicia gave him a small, tired smile. "Yeah," she whispered. "I think I do." James walked over and kissed the top of her head. "We'll be okay," he said softly. Alicia nodded, finally starting to believe it. And for the first time since the night began, she felt like she could breathe again. The following days passed in a blur. Alicia tried not to obsess over the viral post, but it was impossible to avoid. The restaurant incident had taken on a life of its own, with news outlets and social media users transforming it into a symbol of corporate redemption. Charles Matthews basked in the spotlight, his reputation shining brighter than ever. Meanwhile, Denise had vanished from the conversation entirely. No one mentioned the personal grudge that had fueled the humiliation Alicia endured that night. It was as if the most painful part of the experience had never even happened. Alicia kept checking her phone, hoping for a reply from Denise. But the message she sent went unanswered. Days passed, then a week. Eventually, Alicia forced herself to stop waiting. Some things don't get tied up in neat little bows. James reminded her one morning over breakfast, as if reading her thoughts. Alicia nodded slowly. "I know. I just thought maybe, I don't know, maybe she'd find it in her to say something." James gave her hand a squeeze. "You did what you could. That's all you can do." Alicia knew he was right. Closure wasn't always something you received from others. Sometimes it had to come from within. One afternoon, about a week later, Alicia received a notification that caught her off guard. A message from Denise. Her heart raced as she opened it, unsure of what to expect. The message was brief. "I got your message. I'm not ready to forgive you, but I needed to hear it. Thanks. Alicia sat back, exhaling deeply. It wasn't a resolution, but it was something. She wrote back. Alicia whispered to James, who was sitting beside her on the couch. James leaned over to read the message. That's complicated, he said with a small grin. Alicia gave a tired laugh. Yeah, but it's honest. James wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. Honest is good. A few weeks later, James surprised Alicia by suggesting they go back to the restaurant. What? Alicia asked, her eyebrows shooting up in disbelief. Why would we do that? James shrugged. Because I don't want that night to be the last thing we remember about that place. I want us to take it back. Alicia hesitated, chewing on her bottom lip. The idea made her nervous, but James was right. The memory of that night felt like an open wound, and the only way to close it might be to rewrite it. Okay, Alicia whispered, surprising even herself. Let's do it. When they returned to the restaurant, the experience felt entirely different. Denise was gone, and Charles Matthews greeted them personally at the door, wearing the same polished smile he'd worn the night of the incident. So good to see you both again, Charles said smoothly, as if he were welcoming old friends. Your table is waiting. This time, they were seated at one of the best tables in the house, with a perfect view of the skyline. The atmosphere was warm, the service impeccable. Everything seemed designed to erase the memory of what had happened before. Alicia sat back in her chair, taking in the scene. It was perfect, but it wasn't real. She could see through the polished surface, recognizing it for what it was, a performance. James reached across the table and gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. How do you feel? He asked. Alicia smiled softly. Better. Not perfect, but better. They enjoyed their meal in peace this time, talking and laughing the way they had intended to on their anniversary night. As the evening came to a close, James leaned back in his chair, a content smile on his face. We did it, he said. Alicia nodded. We took it back. On the way out, Charles stopped them at the door, handing Alicia a gift card with an over-polished smile. We'd love to have you back again sometime, he said smoothly. Alicia took the card, but something shifted in her expression. Actually, Alicia said, holding Charles's gaze, we won't be coming back. Charles blinked, his confident smile faltering for a fraction of a second. Oh, I see. Was everything all right with your meal tonight? The meal was great, Alicia replied calmly. But that's not the point. She handed the gift card back to Charles, her expression steady. We're done here? Charles gave a polite nod, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of annoyance. Well, thank you for giving us another chance. Alicia smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Take care, Charles. As they stepped outside into the cool night air, James glanced at Alicia, impressed. That was kind of badass. Alicia laughed, the sound light and free. For the first time in weeks, she felt like herself again. It felt good, she admitted, sliding her arm through his as they strolled down the sidewalk. I thought I needed to fix everything to feel better, but maybe I just needed to let it go. James kissed her temple, a proud smile on his face. I told you, we're going to be okay. Alicia smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. The weight of the past no longer felt so heavy. As they walked together under the city lights, Alicia knew that things weren't perfect. Life rarely was. But she was at peace, and that was enough.